So thank you all for being here today. I would like to begin, of course, by first and foremost welcoming all of our guests to this very unique program here today. We have three very exciting panelists that will be speaking on the issue of Ferguson, especially as it relates to their personal experiences on the ground. Many of us have heard what's been going on in Ferguson. We've heard it through the news. We've listened to it through maybe social media. We've also read analysts. We've read reports. We've read policy pieces on it as well. But very rarely do you have the opportunity to really listen to a cause or an issue from those people who are very active and very involved on the ground itself. And today we have a distinguished panel who will be able to speak on this particular issue as well. In a quick summary, I would like to start by first introducing myself. My name is Faizan Syed. I'm the Executive Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations here in St. Louis. We are a chapter of the largest civil liberties and advocacy organization for Muslims in the United States. And I want to take this moment to really summarize what the issue is and then go into our three distinguished panelists as well. First and foremost, all of us remember in August when Mike Brown, an unarmed teenager, was basically shot and killed by a police officer in the city of Ferguson itself. What that led to, that we saw on TV, were basically months of protests and demonstrations against not only his particular shooting and killing, but also against what people saw to be racial injustices that are happening not only within the city of Ferguson, but actually all across the United States as well. Recently, the Department of Justice, they released a report, and the report is very interesting in how it really reflects the grievances that the protesters were saying. A quote that I have here is that the DOJ finding, according to the report, that bias against African Americans was routine and thorough, affecting nearly every aspect of Ferguson police and court operation. For blacks, the report concluded distrust and fear of the police was well-founded. What's unique about Ferguson is that Ferguson has a population of 67% being African Americans, but yet the use of force when the police interact with the population is 88%. The number of vehicles being stopped in the city of Ferguson, 85% of those vehicles stopped were actually African American vehicles being stopped. The number of cases with warrants, when you divide it through racial lines, you have 92% of all the case warrants in Ferguson were given to African Americans as well. And the number of arrests in the city of Ferguson was 93%, and those who were jailed more than 2 days in the city of Ferguson, it was 95% African American as well. And this is just some of the statistics that came out. Since we have a largely Muslim crowd, we have some guests from other faiths as well. I do want to go on a tangent and sort of discuss some of this issue. For many American Muslims, when the issue of Ferguson started, we had a conflict within our own community. Many people supported the protesters, supported their grievances, but you also had many voices within our community not giving the same amount of support as well. In fact, many people would even say that, what does Islam or Muslims have to do with this issue? This is a black issue. This is an African American issue that doesn't have to do with American Muslims. And in my personal humble opinion, I believe those opinions are, well, not very validated for several reasons. First and foremost, the largest population of Muslims in America today are not Pakistanis, are not Arabs, are not any other group. They are African American converts to this religion. That is the #1 largest population. Another reality is that you have, whenever there's injustice done against any people in the earth, then this is an Islamic issue. This is a religious issue. This is a part of our faith to stand up against it and speak against those particular issues as well. Another way that these protests and these demonstrations were delegitimized is that were narrowly reduced to one issue and one cause, and that is, was Darren Wilson, the police officer, justified in shooting Mike Brown? Well, of course, that shooting was the spark that led to the protests and led to the demonstration, but the reasons people went out on the street is not just just because of Mike Brown, but they went onto the street because they were suffering discrimination within their own neighborhoods. They're being arrested unfairly within their own neighborhood. They were victims of police brutality within their own neighborhoods. That's what brought people to the streets. And by narrowing that focus and just saying, is Darren Wilson guilty or not, it actually undermines the entire purpose of this demonstration. And this strategy is actually used against Muslims and against quote-unquote Muslim causes, though they're not Muslim causes, they're human rights causes. For example, the Palestinian cause. When you hear many people talk about the Palestinian cause, it's always reduced to, you know, this terrorist organization attacked us, therefore we have the right to defend ourselves or attack them as well. And you see this type of narrowing being done on multiple causes and issues. You can't address the large issue, so you address something that you can target and you can address as well. I think as American Muslims, the issues that are going on in Ferguson are our issues. They do affect us. Injustice anywhere is something that we should strongly speak out against. With that, I'll end my little introduction. I would like to now introduce our panelists. The way the format of this program will work is that each panelist will have 10 to 12 minutes to speak. As the panelists speak, I recommend the panelists use this microphone that I'm holding in my hand, and I also have this lavalier mic. Please put that on because this program is being recorded so people can watch it in the future. I'll be here moderating it as well, so each panelist will speak for 10 to 12 minutes, and then once they're done speaking, we will then open it up for questions and answers inside the audience. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. I do want to also state that please do leave your question till the end so you're not disrupting the panelists as they're speaking, and then inshallah, God willing, we can now get started. Our first speaker that I would like to introduce, his name is Mustafa Abdullah. He is right now the outreach associate with the ACLU of Missouri, and he's also the founder or the co-founder of Muslims for Ferguson, which is a group created in the aftermath of the protests in Ferguson, and he's been doing a lot of what's called legal observation within Ferguson, which is that he goes out there to monitor the demonstrations, to monitor what the police are doing as well, in order to make sure that no laws are being broken as well. So with that, I will conclude. I would like to introduce Mustafa Abdullah to start off the panel discussion.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. So it's a pleasure to be here. Before I sort of get started with what I want to say, I think it's really important that we continue this kind of conversation, and I hope that maybe on the next panel or as a part of our next community discussion that we feature some of the other voices that are not present on this particular panel, although it's an honor to be with these panelists, and it's an honor to be a part of this conversation. These are folks that have been, Umar and Bassem have been doing a lot of really important things in supporting the movement. We also need to be featuring some more of the female voices that have been leading this movement, but also our black brothers and sisters that are at the core of this struggle. I think it's very important that we uplift those voices as well. So I want to keep that in mind, that we're really just sort of speaking, at least for myself, from my own perspective. I think, how many of you have ever, particularly from the Muslim community, been on like a watch list? Like maybe you haven't been able to travel, or by airplane, or maybe that's been a problem for you, or you've had to go through some extra security checks at the airport. Raise your hand if that's been an issue for you. Okay. Yeah. All right. And sometimes these watch lists are just literally formed by maybe your name matches the name of some so-called terrorist. It could be that you are, your heritage is from a particular country where the U.S. maybe has a little bit more conflict at this point in time with, in terms of our foreign policy. A lot of the reasons for putting somebody on a watch list are fairly arbitrary. I know from my personal experience, some years ago, actually, for my first 3 semesters of college, I was in Atlanta, and I was in the Atlanta airport, and I was actually running late for a flight, and I had to get in I went right straight to get in line at the Delta check-in, because I knew I couldn't check in on the computers, right? Because every time I'm swiping my card, that there was a beep sound that would come up, and you can't check in on the computers, and so I went to check in at the desk. And when I got to the desk, the lady said, "Oh, you should be able to check in at the computer." I was like, "No, I've been through this before." and she tried to check me in, and she couldn't check me in. I had to get clearance. When you're on the watch list, when the government puts you on a watch list, you have to get clearance from a manager who would have a passcode to essentially allow you to get onto this plane, right? And so when finally the manager came, and I was sitting in a back room with him, and he was trying to get me onto this flight, I just asked him, like, why am I on this watch list? He told me I have an irregular flight pattern. And I think this is not an uncommon experience in the Muslim community, right? I think that particularly our immigrant brothers and sisters have at one point been profiled in our community. We have stories from all across the country of unwarranted, what we would argue is unconstitutional, very arbitrary, meaning that there's no real valid reason for law enforcement to be doing surveillance of mosques. Right? So, because there just is a Muslim community, they maybe are going to be setting up like license plate readers. It's technology that will take pictures of your license plate right outside on the public road here, and so they know exactly everyone who's coming to the mosque, and they can track your movement. If you have law enforcement coming into the mosque, if you put your name on that piece of paper, who knows what they're going to do with it? We've had people in even our own communities that have been turned against us to be informants for the FBI. And a lot of times, our Muslim community is even so good at policing itself, most of the time, we turn in the informants, right? But what causes the government to want to surveil us, right? I think the reason I'm raising these very broad stroke questions, like I'm not going to cover all these points in the next 5 minutes, but these are questions that some of the activists actually on the ground who are not Muslim, right, who are African American brothers and sisters, have been raising, that they've been aware of, and they connect the dots of their personal experience with the over-policing of their communities, with police brutality, with police abuse, whether it's being stopped and charged with jaywalking. How many of you have jaywalked? You walk on the street when there's, right? The Ferguson police, the Ferguson report from the Department of Justice, over 90% of the people who've been charged with, I think it's 95% in the report, that have been charged with jaywalking are African American. Are we going to say that African Americans jaywalk in Ferguson more than other people? Right? So are Muslims actually more likely to commit acts of terror? And so does that warrant the curbing of our rights? It's our right. Every human has a right to mobility, right? To actually move around. And so when our right to get on an airplane is restricted, there should be some actual reason, like substantive reason, that would warrant that. So for many of these activists that are on the ground, is my understanding that they perceive from the government structures, from police, from law enforcement, that law enforcement perceives their blackness as somehow being a weapon, right? Like just because of like the color of their skin, that they are treated differently. And it might not be in each particular scenario. We might not exactly be able to say in the case with Darren Wilson that Darren Wilson treated Mike Brown differently because he's black, right? Like sometimes it's hard to pinpoint the exact discrimination. But when we look at the broad strokes of numbers, right, at the numbers, it's pretty overwhelming when you look at the deal with the Department of Justice report on Ferguson. It's pretty overwhelming when we look at the national numbers about the police informants in the Muslim community, the massive surveillance of the Muslim community. And so the last point that I want to make is I think that at this point in time with the Ferguson, with the movement around the Black Lives Matter, a beautiful movement declaring the value that all lives essentially, but particularly in this case, of Black lives matter just as much as any other life. I want to raise that up because I think that there's been this hashtag that's been thrown around of all lives matter. Sometimes people are saying Muslim lives matter. And I think the importance of, it's important to recognize that the reason why it's a Black Lives Matter movement is because African Americans are disproportionately, significantly impacted by policing practices and police brutality than any other group in this country, right? So when we say all lives matter, that waters that message down. Like, of course all lives matter, that's a given. But it's been not a given in this country that Black life matters, right? So the last point I want to lift up is I think it's really important, particularly from our immigrant communities, and this has been something that I've done a lot more since the Black Lives Matter movement started, is to look at our history in this country. One of the people that these activists talk about with great knowledge, with command, is Malcolm X, right? Brother Malcolm. So Malcolm, being somebody who's Muslim, you know, growing up as someone, my father's Egyptian, I mostly grew up in the U.S., I didn't have, I wasn't taught about American Muslim idols. Like, who do we have to look up in our community? I think part of it is because our community is segregated and we tend to learn about our own tribal histories, right? But I think it's really important that if you ever have a chance to look up Malcolm X, particularly if you want to sit down and read a book, Manning Marable's book on Malcolm X, The Life Reinvented, I think has been very, very interesting. But Malcolm X had always talked about all these issues as a human rights struggle. He was connecting the issues of colonialism in Africa and the plight of the Palestinians with the plight of African Americans in Harlem. And so I think that we are a Muslim ummah. We know that when one part of the community of our world is hurting, that we need to actually seriously take a look at that, because we should be waking up in a feverish state when people are calling out in pain, and we should be asking, why? Why are they in pain? And what are our connections to the struggles and to the challenges that they are facing? And how can we sort of build our community, build our ummah, and heal together, act together, and heal together, and build together? So that's the last question I would leave you all with, is to do some reading and thinking about the history of Muslims in this country.
All right, thank you very much, Mustafa. Our next panelist is Bassem Masri. Bassem Masri is, I guess the best way to call him is an accidental activist. He was involved very much so in the Ferguson issue. He was also a live streamer. How many of you saw his live stream as it was going on? Okay, some of you definitely saw his live stream. So he became an accidental activist. He saw the issue. He wanted to do something about it. He had this new medium, which is live streaming, so the public and the world can see exactly what's going on in the Ferguson area. And one thing, of course, Bassem can talk about whatever he wants, but one thing and one issue that came out of Ferguson, if we learned that many people are basically being put into prison in what are almost debtors' prisons. And if you don't know what a debtors' prison is basically in the past, if you didn't pay off your debt, you would be sent to jail. That was your punishment. Right now, many of these municipalities, they will give people tickets. They will give people fines who are impoverished, who are poor. And when these individuals are unable to pay off their fines, they get sent to jail. And then their fines increase, and then they're always in and out of prison as well. And this is one of the sad realities we see many people facing today. So I wonder if maybe Bassem could, if he has time, if he wishes to touch on that issue.
That was actually the first thing I was going to talk about, was the fact that basically, you know, Ferguson is one municipality in St. Louis. We have 92 of them. And they all practice the same type of predator policing. Now, I myself, I'm a victim of the predator policing in the debtor's prison. One time I was in Hazelwood, I got a ticket, and I got sent to jail. Sat there for a whole week because I couldn't afford to get out of jail, you know, to see the judge. You know, the judge told me, "Do you have any money?" I told him, "No, I don't have no money." He told me, "Well, go back to jail until you get some more money." Came back next week, so it was 2 weeks that I sat down there. Came back and told him, "Hey man, I don't have any money." He sent me back to jail again. So I ended up spending 25 days in jail for a traffic ticket. And basically I had lost my job. Everything was done after that, and then I still had to pay the fine. So I didn't get time served, none of that stuff. So you could say that what happened with Mike Brown, there was a lot of underlying tensions that happened that were in the community there before Mike Brown was killed, and that this was going to be inevitable. So August 10th, the day after Mike Brown got killed, I went down there to see what was going on, and to see a tear gas canister rolling down the street, just to see people, protesting and venting their anger in a peaceful manner. When down the street, there was people, doing what they were doing. It was all over the news. Everybody knows what was going on, and they were focusing more on that more than on the issues that were being handled. So when I saw what was going on the news, and us being Muslims and me Palestinian, we know that the media lies. They do whatever they want for basically the for the 1% to push their narrative, and they don't want to see any of us get free, because prisons are privatized. They make money off the prisons from the state, and this is a very, very big issue. What I'm saying? So I just took it upon myself. That's when I made a Twitter account. I was never on social media, just to do my part as far as getting the message out there and showing people really what we're out here for. And the thing is, what we have to realize is that, right now in America, there is something called Islamophobia. It's very real, and whenever one group of people's coming out and they're saying that they're having a problem, it's a duty for everybody to stand up with those people, because whenever it comes down to our turn, what's going to happen then, So I really felt the need to go out there and, represent. And there's a big issue with the way that the police handle people in these 92 municipalities when it comes to minorities. They look at us not as constituents, but as revenue sources. And this is something that's unacceptable. They were doing blatant, unconstitutional acts, and nobody was there to hold them accountable. So the people were out there trying to do that, and it took thousands of people came out into the street, and it took a report to validate those people's voices, not their voices though, So all I can really say is that it's a shame that in this democratic society, when we're asking a change from our community to them, that they not only not want to do it, they're resisting it and denying it, that it ever happened. You got these stats like he said 95%, people getting caught for jaywalking. You had just a number of disproportionate things that are happening, and it's not just going to be going on to the African American community, but anyone of color, anyone that does not conform to the white supremacy agenda. And personally, it hit me hard, so, I went out there every single day to make sure that we keep this movement alive, I've been arrested, you can say, and this is no joke, over the course of the period of my life, since I got my license, over 60, 70 times, just for traffic tickets. They'd come to my house, wait for me to get into my car, pull me over right there and take me to jail in front of everybody, embarrassing me. They'd belittle you, all that stuff. And for somebody who's trying to just live a normal lifestyle, barely making it week to week, this can really put a dent in somebody's future, And whenever they do take somebody's license away, and with the public transportation system that we have in this country, it really turns you into a second-class citizen. And there's no way for you to crawl out of that. You're basically stuck. You can't live a respectable life just like the person next to you can, and it's all basically to deal with the color of your skin. And for us being in 2015, you would think something like that would be ridiculous, but it turns out that it's not. Before all this, I knew white supremacy existed, but I didn't know it existed to this like, it's crazy. That's all I can say. I get a lot of hate speech, especially on the internet, and you never would think that the people that are protecting and serving us actually think the same way too. We saw that with the emails and whatnot, they were outlined in the report, and some of those racist emails included Islamophobia, and right now there's a big thing about Islam. They're really looking at our religion, and they're scrutinizing it in the most horrendous ways. So if we don't take care of this issue now, we're going to be next, you know? And then what's going to happen then? Like, if we, that's why I made sure to stay there out there every day, to be able to represent our people out there, to say that we didn't do that, you know, that we didn't, you know, stay silent, because silence is consent. And, you know, I implore anyone that hasn't been involved in anything like that to just kind of do research and try to get involved any which way you can, because right now is the time. You know, we started a national conversation on race relations in the United States, and it's time for us to once and for all finish this. I mean, you can't really change it. You know, racism is, it's like, you know, it's taught to somebody. It's not really anything tangible that we can change, but we can change the system that's very tangible. So, you know, that's what I implore. And, you know, as far as like the ticketing in the debtors' prisons is concerned, you know, they generated like $3 million just Ferguson last year, and they're projected to make $3 million this year just off ticketing, almost 30 to 40% of their budget. And that goes off for the other 92 municipalities inside St. Louis too. You know, we can't just put this on just Ferguson. They're all guilty of it. Ferguson just had the magnifying glass put on there. You have municipalities like Pine Lawn, St. Anne, all of them that practice the same, and that are even worse. You can't pay, you go to jail, you know? There's no alternative, no community service, none of that stuff. That's all about money, money, money. And it's unacceptable. And for them to be able to do this and to break the Constitution, you know, and for them to be no accountability whatsoever. I mean, Chief Jackson, he had severance pay. You know, his punishment was to get $100,000. You know, so you can see the hypocrisy in the system. The system's not here to work for us. We're working for the system. You know, feeding it everything that we have. And that's what started the American Revolution to begin with, was overtaxation and all this stuff. And really, to me, I feel like it was all a sham, you know? Everything that they put in there, it was just a lie just to keep people appeased, you know? And it's time for us, you know, this generation right here to take a stand and make this country what we want it.
Thank you very much, Bassem. With that, we have our last panelist, Umar Lee. He's a writer. He's also an activist. He's also been there live streaming and tweeting, and also putting on social media what's going on. If any of you saw the video of the Quick Trip being burned down, the person who actually recorded that video is Umar Lee right here. He was the one that was there. He was the one that recorded that video. He's very, very active. He's a lifelong writer, and I think, you know, very excited to hear what he has to say. Umar?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very long-winded, so I'm going to try to check myself. And I've divided things into 5 categories, which I will be brief. But I first want to say, very excited to be on the panel with Brother Mustafa, Abdullah, and Bassem Masri, who've both done very great work out in Ferguson. Number one is, why did I get involved? You know, I was born and raised in North St. Louis City in North County. All of my family's in North St. Louis County. And the issues we saw highlighted in Ferguson, issues that have been around my whole life. I'd seen these issues forever. All the issues that have been highlighted are not new issues. They're not issues that are confined to Ferguson. As a matter of fact, there are issues that are probably worse in neighboring municipalities like Jennings and Delwood and Florissant. I saw these issues brewing since childhood. Over 20 years ago, I talked to a community organizing organization called Acorn, and I said, hey, we need to hit the ground running in North County. They said, North County, who's concerned about the suburbs? And that was generally the attitude even amongst activists, that the city was the area of focus, and you know, the county was kind of boring. The municipalities were kind of boring. Meanwhile, you had new dynamics on the ground and problems of racism, of policing, of governance, of jailing, of taxation brewing in North St. Louis County. You had a North County that was largely built after the Second World War that boomed in population because of things like the GI Bill, the desegregation of city schools, the interstate highway, and overcrowding in the city. And it was built as a lily white part of St. Louis County. The only places African Americans historically lived in North County were in Kinloch and Robertson, the two historical African American communities out there. Ferguson used to have a wall between Ferguson and Kinloch, a literal wall like the apartheid wall we see in Palestine. So this is the history out in North County, and you have to know this history. Then as you begin to have, in the 1980s, African Americans moving further into North County and leaving Kinloch through the airport buyout program, then you have a massive white flight from North St. Louis County to St. Charles County. But those police officers, those city employees, those elected officials still reflected the old demographics. Thus, the stage was set for a lot of the problems that we see, a generational divide and a racial divide. Number two, I want to address Muslims in the area. I think we should not talk about Muslims as an abstract. Mike Brown was killed on Canfield off of West Florissant. There is a masjid on West Florissant, started by Nigerian Muslim brothers, called the West Florissant Masjid. It's in the city of Jennings, right next to Ferguson. You go right to the north of Ferguson is Dar Jalal, predominantly Palestinian Arab masjid. And we see all throughout the Ferguson area Muslim business owners, Palestinian, including one of our brothers right here, and Senegalese Muslims. We go into the city of St. Louis on West Florissant. In the Walnut Park neighborhood, we have a masjid which I was a co-founder of under the leadership of Sheikh Abdurrahman Basir, the Islamic Institute of Learning, Masjid Umar. So Muslims are not strange to this area. I myself used to catch the 74 West Florissant bus into the city to go to the masjid. So we can't look at Muslims as being strangers to this area. When they say, why did Muslims get involved? Where Muslims were always there. And what do Muslims have to offer? What do we have to offer is we're not the status quo, and we're not the traditional reaction, which is the glorification of victimization and the embracing of that. We tell the people there is power, and there's power in La ilaha illallah. There is power in embracing the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is something that can alleviate your status as an individual, as a community, and as a society. Number three, the grassroots movement. As Faizan said to begin, people get caught up in the metaphor of Darren Wilson and Mike Brown. But the people wouldn't be there day after day, night after night, through rain, through cold, through the heat. If you remember last summer, we were marching in the heat, if it wasn't for a greater issue that's been going on for decades. So a grassroots movement of young people, of young African Americans, is a response to these issues. And it's a grassroots movement. And this grassroots movement not only grew up on their experiences, but the experiences of their parents and their uncles and their aunts and their family members. And the traditional knock on St. Louis was so lazy, everyone else rioted in the 60s. People in St. Louis just stayed at home watching television. And these young people wanted to change that reputation of St. Louis. In St. Louis, we are people to take to the street. Now, in response to the grassroots movement, we saw two things. We saw vitriol and hate. Bassem and I daily getting death threats. We saw an army of online trolls dedicated to hate to the protesters, hate to African Americans, hate to Muslims. And we saw this in real life. I was arrested on 2 occasions in Ferguson. The second time I was arrested, they had me behind the Ferguson police station. They said they were going to pour pig's blood over me and serve me ham sandwiches and bacon and making all types of Islamophobic remarks to me. And this is some of the things that Bassem and I have had to deal with on a daily basis. I can't speak to Mustafa, but I know Bassem and I have had to deal with these things on a daily basis. Their Islamophobia is tied to their anti-blackness, and the common theme is their white supremacy. Is a belief that anything outside of the white identity, the white culture, the white narrative is harmful, must be defeated, must be destroyed. It's a culture of fear, the fear of the immigrant, the fear of the Muslim, the fear of the African American, the fear of anyone not like them. On the flip side, you also saw hijacking, purchasing. You saw many people on the institutional left. They saw these young African-American activists, and they said, we can exploit them for our own agenda. So let's go and try to help them, give them money, support them, but ultimately it's to serve their agenda, not to serve the agenda of the grassroots. So all these things happen when you have a grassroots movement. They happen in Palestine, they happen in Egypt, they happen no matter where you are in the earth. So number 5, and in closing, the future. What does the future bring? We're all out here for a better future. A better future for everyone, a better future for the community in Ferguson, for the community in North County and St. Louis, which has become a national issue, and a future for all of us. So if you want to be a positive actor in a better future for all of us, you need to get involved in a constructive way. You need to get involved in a constructive way. And before I go, Mustafa gave a book recommendation, and so I'll give mine. I would not recommend Manning Marable's Malcolm X. I would recommend the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. Yeah. And my Sheikh Abdurrahman Basir, beautiful man who's in Oklahoma now, but started the mastery with us in the Walnut Park neighborhood in North St. Louis. We read this book in conjunction with The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, which was one of the great anti-colonial works. And many of you immigrant Muslims come from your parents and grandparents from experiences of colonialism, and unfortunately many of your families have taken the baggage of colonialism here through an inferiority complex and other things. So I encourage you to read The Wretched of the Earth from Frantz Fanon along with the autobiography of Alex Haley, and complete it with the tafsir of Surah Hujurat by Sheikh Bilal Phillips, and it is a great trifecta. Thank you.